some sponsors this evening. New sponsor this month, Propeller, Justin right there, if you give these a wave. Propeller, they do like full service finance for your startup. They help you with anything financial related to your startup, so they can plug in wherever you need help. So, very cool. Do they have money? I don't know. Do you guys give people money, or you just help people organize their money? See, these entrepreneurs are always trying to get more capital. So of course we have Egan Nelson, World-Class Counsel for Startups. They've sponsored us all year. So if you need an attorney, Mark Nathan, I guess, is not here, but he's usually here. But if you need to get connected to Egan Nelson, let me know, and I can connect you. And also, so Startup Grind has Heroku sponsoring this month too. You might have seen over here, we've got some of this Heroku swag. Heroku is kind of like an application deployment platform for developers to push up their code really easily and kind of get things online. It's been around for a lot of years. A lot of developers use it just as a place to push their code just to get started. And then it can scale up as your business grows. You can turn dials and make it make it scale just by turning a few dials and spending a lot more dollars so you can make it work. As well. And then we have Omkar here. He's from the Google for Startups. So he works at Google. But Google for Startups has, Google Cloud credits, and they have, sort of architects like Omkar, and he's here in Austin. So if you want to figure out sort of how to architect your app, you're building something on Google for, Google Cloud, he can help you with that. And we're talking about maybe having a workshop where basically they just lay out all the Google Cloud stuff. If someone wants to check that out for the developer audience, you can sign up. We have a little sign up form somewhere. I don't know if you picked it up, but it was over there. But we want to try to see how much interest there is for that. All right, so we're going to do something as well that's a little different. I had a startup founder come on at the beginning last month. Someone was visiting from Miami, Florida, and they won the Startup Grind global competition for their startup. So we had them come in, and I was interviewing one of their investors, or the firm that invested in them, as my guest. So I thought, this will be perfect. You guys will come in, and we'll put you on stage. So we did like a 10-minute thing, and I thought it was really cool. So this month, I decided I would invite another startup founder, someone from Austin, to come up here, Carol Fowler. So she's right over here, and she's going to give you an update on her startup Transmute and give you sort of a bit about her story. She works in the blockchain space. She's going to tell you a little bit about what she's been through, what they're building, and we're going to keep it, 10 minutes or so, but I'm really excited to have her here tonight. So let's give her a round of applause and have her come up to kick this thing off. Thank you. Yeah, do you need the podium? I can move it up here.
Nope, I'll just set it on another chair of the floor. All right. Hello, everyone. So I know this is a really casual setting, so I prepared something a little bit differently, and I don't actually often get to share the story of being in the blockchain space during the biggest kind of hype cycle of the space thus far. So I'm going to start with that. So when we met Damon and some of the other people in the room, we were going through Techstars, and our product, or the product that we were pitching, was something akin to Heroku for the blockchain world. We wanted to build a platform that bridged centralized and decentralized infrastructure and would let you build hybrid applications really, really quickly. So we raised our first bit of pre-seed capital, built the first iterations of the product, and then tried to sell it to enterprises. And basically what we found is that there was literally zero demand for distributed storage or anything that was cryptocurrency powered within the enterprise, at least the enterprises we were talking to, which were largely not financial institutions. And so you can imagine, having raised our first capital, which we actually raised on the promise of a future crypto token, how it probably felt to have spent a tremendous amount of resources understanding the legal gray area. I was joking that I know way too much about SEC regulations at this point, never intended to understand that much. But we found the right path paths forward, and we designed and proved, at least to ourselves and our investors, the microeconomics were sound in our platform. And ultimately, it came back to the basics. There was no market demand for holding a token, and no customer demand on the sides of the enterprises who are supporting storage applications. They found no customer demand for distributed storage. However, what we did find tremendous demand for is the thing that we're still working on today, and it's the thing that got my co-founder and I into this space, and that is identity. So I'm going to kind of dive into what we do, but first how I got into the space. So I actually came from the hardware space. I was working in medical semiconductors for a Department of Defense trusted foundry here in town when I had the really amazing fortune to have my entire genome sequenced by one of my customers at the time. And I think I'm one of 2 people in the world who has this terabyte of data for free, at least in terms of American citizens, and I was only number about 1,100 in the world to have this done. I still don't own the data. So this kind of kickstarted a saga of trying to understand why I couldn't own the data, why I had to pay my doctor and sit behind her desk and unencrypt all the files that were then not the raw data, and a series of divisions were sold off of this company, and so I got to follow my data without my consent around the world. And so this kind of pushed me into understanding the regulations, but also the technical constraints around how PII is handled in different geographies by different application, and really what some of the problems with it are today. And kind of coming full circle to what we're working on now, and what our market research has showed us, is that if you're building any application at all, you have to account for identity. And so I like to say that identity is the gene of software applications, and if you don't sufficiently account for it, in a lot of cases, as we're seeing with a lot of the recent headlines and data breaches, our infrastructure is failing us and can be incredibly costly. So once we discovered this, we initially tried to, we tried to sell basically what's called self-sovereign identity to the enterprise. So blockchain-powered identity that's very GDPR compliant. Users can own and control their data. And what we found was that even though all of these statistics are certainly true, and even though enterprises need to worry about their reputations, their crisis when it comes to identity looks very differently. And the last thing an enterprise wants to hear is that you're asking them to rip and replace infrastructure or give up control of their users and customers or vendors' data, even if it's not relevant to the transaction at hand. So the resulting challenge of the existing totally centralized infrastructure, as we see it, we call it the enterprise identity crisis. And it's this concept that with impending data privacy regulation and with the ability to address global scale like cloud supports, and in that transition to moving infrastructure to cloud, enterprises have a situation where as they grow, they have to grow their risk disproportionately. So this is setting aside purely surveillance capitalist business models and focusing on the enterprises who need to take in a lot of data but may not but then need to store and be responsible or liable for that data kind of in perpetuity instead of just the transaction at hand with their customer. So our solution to this is called Transmute ID. So the product that we sell is a digital identity tool for the enterprise. And the biggest advantages are that even though we use distributed ledgers, we integrate with your existing identity provider. So today, anything that's OpenID Connect or Active Directory based, we go where the users are, and we inextricably link those users to decentralized identifiers that are immutable and anchored to a public or permission ledger. The result of this is far more visibility into the coordination and the interactions that are happening across your enterprise ecosystem. Because I'm positive there's engineers in the room, I'm gonna hop a little bit through how we do this. So these are the 3 technologies that we combine. We combine the scale of cloud, the security of decentralized PKI, which is the real innovation, blockchain's the auditability layer, and then the automated tracking. The other thing that we have learned from working with enterprises as well as federal agencies is that open standards and vendor lock-in are 2 hot topics. And so we chose to build an architecture that supports whoever you're using for your identity provider and wherever you're storing your data. So today we support the top 3 major public cloud providers plus Oracle. Again, anything OpenID Connect or Active Directory based on the IDP side. And then in terms of ledgers, we have one single smart contract, and we've adapted it today to support anything that's Ethereum or EVM based, including permission ledgers like Quorum, and anything that's Hyperledger Fabric based. Really quick to just give you an idea of the industry landscape, because most people who are aware of distributed identity systems think of things like Civic or Uport, where you're giving the unbanked populations and or vulnerable populations, largely in the developing world, identities and ownership over those identities. How does that apply in the enterprise, and what is that business model? There's a lot of literature out from us and from Microsoft and IBM validating what we like to call an enterprise agent business model. So similarly today to how enterprises manage those identities, these are products and services that allow the enterprise to manage those keys, but still provide the same ability for a customer or vendor to be forgotten or unhook and port their data elsewhere. These are how we slice and dice our market. So you'll see on the left-hand side the self-sovereign identity providers I've pointed to, and you can see on the right side some of our direct competitors, although Trusted Key was just recently acquired by Workday. There's very few of us supporting enterprise infrastructure in this way, and it's still very much kind of a burgeoning market. Because there's lots of hype around blockchain, I wanted to share how one of kind of our consulting slides. So these are the 3 major questions we ask any potential customer that we're engaging with, and these are the 3 questions we used in our market research to decide which market we were going to attack first. Because identity is horizontal, we needed to pick the lowest hanging fruit. And the purple areas are the areas we've had paid engagements with today and that we work most heavily in. And our first target market, as you can probably see, is chains of custody and most specifically supply chain management. And this is for a few reasons. It's a giant market with a high coordination burden where your relationships are your IP and your secret sauce. And it's a space that is largely still paper-based. And so they have an opportunity as they digitize to either digitize themselves into silos or to leapfrog a few different innovations to find the thing that's most efficient. And so as we've been working with supply chain companies and federal agencies, and I'm going to try to watch the time and talk faster, we've realized that the existing systems are either manual, very fragmented, super opaque, especially in the semiconductor space where I came from, and that ultimately a tremendous amount of revenue is lost due to an incomplete view of who's liable in all of these different points of handoff in a chain of custody. I already talked about those. So what our product does, I want to walk through a very specific use case. So right now, what we largely find is that our customers are federal agencies, and this is for a couple different reasons. Decentralized identity is cool, DPKI is cool, but the actual, the biggest value add here is actually the cryptographically secure credential, or the verifiable credential in standards language, that's produced when 2 people who have decentralized identities sign a document, like a driver's license or a bill of lading. And so we have found kind of our niche in the market with the federal government working on digitizing import-export licenses and associated driver credentials. And so one of the use cases that we're working on right now is on steel imports, largely from China into the United States. Right now, a lot of this is very manual. And so what happens is with Transmute ID's platform or whatever ERP or IDP that you're using that we've integrated with, you will onboard your vendors and they will be assigned corporate decentralized identities. So the entities themselves have decentralized identities, and from that point on, as the steel or as the raw material moves through transit, all of the other actors who have to sign off on accepting liability of both the asset as well as the bill of lading, and any sort of affiliated credentials depending on what's required to move that particular good, because steel is very different from arms and explosives. Each of these credentials is built upon through the chain of custody. I'm going to flip through these pretty quickly. When it gets, cool. Awesome. So as it enters the US, largely Customs Border Protection is seeing the final credential, which is kind of Russian doll style signatures that spin all the way up into what the final verifiable credential. And this is really important because this is the thing that is anchored to a blockchain. And because of some of our proprietary and open source technology underneath it, you can see all of the different operations and every handoff in the chain of custody and any changes along the way. And it's important, just kind of the final piece is that we use a decentralized identity method that batches operations in that way, because right now it's been very expensive to write a hash to a blockchain. And so, yeah, our technology helps you do this in a really, really cost-effective way. Yep. And I'm around at the end. This is, we're based in Austin. This is, sorry, I'm like looking at different slides than are showing. This is my team, and I'm happy to answer questions about kind of our experience in the blockchain space, traceability, and decentralized identity. Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Carol. All right. All right, so let's move along. My guest for the night, our guest, is Qingqing Ouyang. I'm doing my best to pronounce it. I'm not good with Chinese, but she tried to help me pronounce it correctly. Sorry? Are you trying to, you know how to say it? Okay, Qingqing Ouyang or Ouyang? Okay. All right, well, anyhow, so she is the EVP of engineering at Ojo Labs, and she leads, or has led the growth of the engineering team from 5 to 40 in less than 1 year. And on her team, top talents in engineering, data science, and management work together to tackle the challenge of helping people make important decisions using technology. So that's their big mission. And I want to welcome her to the stage. Thank you for joining us. And you just flip it on there. Yeah, flip it up. There you go. All right.
Thank you for letting me sit on my side.
Yeah, sure.
My only quirk, I need to be on the side of people.
So the only thing is to put the mic up to your mouth, especially if you speak more quietly, to make sure people can hear. And we're also recording, so all these rooms are wired with live streams. So whenever they have big events, they have a live stream going, and it gets captured to Austin Tech Live on YouTube. Just so you know, if you ever want to go back and listen. So, all right, welcome.
Good, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have to say, at 7 o'clock this morning, I interviewed an engineer to talk about the math behind the decentralized identity. 7 o'clock in the morning.
That'll wake you up.
It's a full cycle of the day, so thank you. I look at that going, I just heard about that algorithm today at 7 o'clock. So it was great.
So you start your day with blockchain and end your day
Woke
with
me
blockchain.
right up. Keep me energized.
So what I like to do at the beginning of these talks is just to let the audience in on a little bit about where you come from, kind of, where you grew up, what's your, educational background, kind of what are some of the things in your background that make you, you. So if you could share a little bit about that so people can understand where you're coming from.
Okay. I was born and raised in Beijing, China. I came to the United States when I was 20 years old. I went to Smith College. It's a women's college, although I didn't know that before I went. That's a different story. I was a math major and ran out of classes to take by junior year, so I had to become a CS major as well because I didn't realize you can graduate early, so I thought college was 4 years, so I had to anyway, all the things that you do when you're a foreigner. I went to University of Wisconsin-Madison to get a master's degree in CS, and that's how I started my career. So basically, right after I graduated, I joined 2 startups. Both failed. And then I thought, okay, that's it. I'm going to a safer place. So I joined Sun Microsystems. I was a developer at Sun Microsystems for almost 10 years. At the end of that, I became an engineering manager. So I did not know that as a foreigner you can become a manager. So I was gonna lifer do development for the rest of my life until my manager said, actually, you should try this. And once I tried that, I realized, you can do that. And then post-Sun Microsystems, basically the size of company I joined becomes smaller and smaller. So I now came back to the engineering, to the startup world, which is a lot of fun.
So when you first graduated, you tried to do a startup, and what was your startup about? What were you building?
It's called PlanetX. Actually, the original name was Net Pharmacy, and I decided that was not cool enough. So basically, this is at the around the time that .com was very popular, so everything is online. So the idea there is to sell prescription drugs online. So that's why they were called, Net Pharmacy. We competed with a company called Drugstore.com, and basically two companies are doing pretty much the same thing. So that was the very first one. PlanetX actually went IPO. Which is kind of exciting. Now that I think of it, sorry, that has not come to me for a while. So the first company I joined actually went IPO, was not actually very successful because they didn't really figure out how to make money. Because in healthcare, prescription drug, it's not OTC, right? The management, the healthcare management of your prescription transfer is a big mess. So, yeah, that was not very scalable. That's my first experience as startup.
So when we met recently to sort of talk about tonight, and you said that you probably wrote more code in the first 2 years than you have written in the rest of your whole career. So were you this was your startup and you were coding like mad to create it?
I joined as early engineers for PlanetX. For my next one, basically when PlanetX kind of was going downhill, my mentor, or one of the senior engineers, took me with him to the next company. And the next company, I was actually he's the first one, I'm the second one. And in that company, I think there's a period of time where I worked for 6 months straight from, let me see, from 7 a.m. to 3 a.m. every day. So that's when I say, man, did I write a lot of code, because when you work that many hours, you write a lot of code. The next 10 years, I did write a lot of code, but it's kind of more spread out, not that concentrated.
That's dedication.
Yeah, actually, to that, for the engineers here, you really do, if I can advocate, need to write a lot of code. So one thing I didn't realize, I was kind of clueless. I sat there and write a lot of code. And interestingly, the code I wrote was a code generator that generated code, that generated other code, generated another template, and generated all the J2E component. If you're that old, you know what J2E is. So, and the point there is actually when I interviewed at Sun Microsystems, I interviewed for the J2E platform team, and I actually never even read the spec. I didn't know it's a thing, except I wrote code for 6 months to generate the template that generates the template that generates the code, because you have to think all the way back on what the hell you're generating. And so when I interviewed, sorry, can I just go along for 1 minute on this?
Go for it.
Yeah. When I interviewed, one of the spec lead interviewed me, and the next interviewer was late. So she ran out of things to talk to me about, and she started flipping through this spec and started asking me, what's in the servlet? What is the first method? What's the second method? I'm like, I've never even read the spec. But after I came to calm down, I realized that is a thing that I did for 6 months, that generate the thing, that generate that thing. So I just had to think 3 times over and then forward and backward to realize what I was actually writing. That's how I got the job, because I literally know that spec front and back because I wrote code 3 times over. And she literally went through the spec. Anyway, write code. You figure out eventually what it is that you are actually doing.
So I'm guilty of I've worked with J2EE, and I understand why you wrote generators to create the J2EE, because working with it was extremely painful.
Yeah.
And that's why when Ruby on Rails came along, I ran to it with wholeheartedly, because
It's okay if you don't know J2E, it just means
doing
you're
web
young.
development with J2E back then was the way things were done, but it was targeted at 1% of
That's right.
the 1% companies, the very big companies, and there was all these startups and small teams trying to create web applications with it, and it
Super
was
hard.
very painful. So
Yeah, which is why
I understand
actually,
why you did that.
Yeah, the startup we were trying to do is to be able to, the generator we wrote was being able to say, go to an enterprise and say, hey, I can create your enterprise application like that, right? Give me an XML that defines your company structure. Everything gets generated all the way from, the presentation layer all the way to your persistence layer. So
that is crazy. So, I mean, I think one of the things that I want to talk to you about is sort of building engineering teams, putting the right person in the right place, topics of that nature. So, I mean, one thing that comes to mind is when you're interviewing, let's say for a developer, what are you looking for when you are interviewing? Let's say like a more senior developer. What are you expecting to learn from your interview process?
In my interviews, I do not ask people technical questions, which if you read our Glassdoor, somebody actually complained that I didn't ask them technical questions. For every environment, there's always something that consistently I am looking for. For engineers, right, number one, to me, most important thing is aptitude, right? Have you learned the way to learn? Because especially for startups, things change, right? So if you don't know how to learn, then you're gonna get stuck with what you know at the moment, and it's very hard to adapt to changes. The second one I'm looking for is attitude. So are you still willing to learn, right? So I do acknowledge that, I don't know, there is a cognitive load beyond which you're kind of just like, that's it, right? I'm full. So for people who have good attitude and still are aptitude and still willing to learn, the third thing I look at positively then it's experience. I think if you check the box for aptitude and attitude, I think your experience is a positive, because then you can use your experience within context, right? So if you don't check the first two boxes, I typically think of your experience as a negative, as a hindrance, because then that becomes your hammer and everything is a nail to you. So when I interview candidates, I look a lot into, do they have the growth mindset? How do they learn? Are they still willing to learn? When they talk about learning, do they proactively talk about learning? And when they talk about learning, are they excited or there's a drag on them, right? So to vet out the aptitude and the attitude part. For each of the company, so those are the baselines. For each of the team that I build, I do think within your company, within your environment, there are certain things you have to be very specific about, because for people to be fit, that culture fit, there's certain things in the DNA of your company, if you understand what that is, then you want to look for a certain type of people, right? So at Ojo, for example, there are 3 things on my team that I'm looking for. The very first one is just be a good teammate, collaborate, because we run a very complex business. There are a lot of things that you have to work on, and a lot of things are very hard to solve. So unless you can work not only well with your fellow engineers, but also with product, with design, with the rest of the business, it won't get done, right? Everybody brings very unique capability, to the team, but no one is saving the world by themselves. So you have to work together. The second thing that we're looking for at Ojo, for example, is user empathy. So we always put users first, because we taught ourselves as AI machine learning company. We hired a lot of very, very intelligent people. But at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter how complex your machine learning model is, how beautiful your infrastructure is, how much scale you can handle, if it didn't really solve the user's problem, right? The people don't really care, how whatever it is, if you didn't really solve their problem. So at Ojo, we have to be very careful and hire people not only are IQ high, but also EQ high, so they understand, they strive to understand what problem you're trying to solve. That way, when they apply their IQ, they can solve the right problems instead of, I just want to solve this algorithm problem, when it's the wrong problem to solve. The third thing is, at Ojo, again, grit. So for us, because we're solving a very complex problem, and we're just gonna have to be very, very okay to try and things didn't work out, right? So the only failure to us is when you didn't learn anything. As long as we're learning, it's fine. And my engineering team has to be very okay to say, I worked really hard for 3 months and it didn't work out. And you know what? Learn something, pick it up, let's go again, right? So, and we're gonna do that for days, for months, for years, until we can solve this problem. So that's something that, I'm looking for people who have very, just that grit and perseverance. And that is not always true, right? For the previous team that I built, that's not the 3 things that I look for. So it really just very specific to the environment. So on top of the, aptitude, attitude, and experience.
So it sounds like you're wanting people to be able to feel like they can make mistakes and learn from them. So how do you do that? I mean, how do you make people feel comfortable making mistakes when a lot of people fear making mistakes and that keeps them from taking the actions that they need to take?
Yeah, I'm really weird that way. So I actually have people who worked on my team here, so you can check me. I just get really excited when something goes wrong. Right? Especially if it's something like, what? That can go wrong? And you really just get on with it, why is it wrong? So we run, blameless retrospectives, right? So it's always led by our tech leads. So it's an environment, and our retrospectives are open to everybody. You can, anybody can come and just sit there and hear what could go wrong, right? We milk the bejesus out of every incident, like what you can learn. There's a code that you can change. There's a process you can change. It's the way you behave when incident happen. There's just every single thing that can be changed and improved. We'll talk about it, right? So it's never about how come you didn't do that. It's about what can we do differently next time. So I think if you celebrate it, then that's okay. To me, one thing I would say is I'm very okay to make new mistakes, same mistakes over and over. I will have a problem with it. I feel like we haven't solved it. This time we're gonna solve it. So I think as long as you have that attitude and people will feel safe.
Are there other cultural things that you try to build into your engineering teams? That sort of, self-reinforcing learning from each other. You mentioned collaboration earlier. Are there any practices that you found are good for sort of building culture?
Yeah, so interestingly, the 3 things I described is something that I sort of made a practice of every time I show up at a new place and say, okay, in this environment, what's already in the DNA of the company, you don't have to constantly repeat, right? People somehow certain people were just drawn to this company because of that. But in this environment, to be successful, what else do you have to do? You mentioned learning. At Ojo, being a team is something that came to me fairly early on. And this user empathy also came to me very early on because I got hit by we have a lot of sophisticated engineering, but we haven't solved the problem yet. And we constantly talk about how beautiful this code is, except we don't talk about the users. So that's something that came fairly straightforward. But grit was something that I spent a lot of time. I talked to a lot of engineers on my teams, what is it? There's something here that I can't put my finger on. We tried learning, right, is one thing, because really what we're trying to encourage is how do we get things out of, what is that characteristic we want everybody to exhibit. But through those discussions, right, when we finally landed on grit, but throughout this discussion, because everybody in the company, on my team is involved, we actually spurred a lot of, these are the things that we need to think about. So my team actually I really think it's because the good people that I have the privilege to work with, right? We actually have a lot of self-organized learning group, right? So my data scientist started, data science lunch and learn, right? Even our legal counsel come to our data science lunch and learn, go, I just learned something today on how this algorithm works. And everybody's very, very bought into learning, right? So it's not just product engineering. And we have, let's see, front-end guild. So our front-end engineers come together. They work on different product teams, but then they will come together, self-organizing, come together, discuss topic as well. I actually just had an engineer who was volunteering to run leadership council, right? He said, I think we should all be better tech leads. So these are the topics that we should talk about. So I think that when you have talk about learning so much that people want to figure out how to learn and just give them a space and encouragement, typically that means you provide free lunch, then they'll do it. One tactical, very useful tip.
I happen to notice on your social media feed that you guys had a hackathon somewhat recently. Some pictures of some of the developers who won. Why do you have hackathons, and what do you get out of running these events?
Why do I run hackathons? Good point. My guys ask all the time.
Because they want to do it, or
they really want to do it. I think hackathons are, when you're in, we're busy, right? So you're busy in life, you're busy at work. When you get into work, there's structure in place, there's sprint, but when you're in that kind of, maybe monotonous is the wrong word, but day in and day out, it's kind of similar. You kind of lose some of your creativity. So I do think creativity comes out of having space, just having some time not in this thing that you're doing day in and day out. So hackathon is a very good way of giving people some time and space. So we actually, we did an idea pitch the week before. Again, the entire company participate. And then we took 3 days out of the week to say, in this 3 days, we don't do anything but hack, right? People were able to come up with a lot of great ideas. Again, this hackathon was very interesting. It's the first time that I don't know what it is about this team of people. We never even said what you can and cannot hack on. Literally, other than a emoji context that somebody wrote, auto generator that somebody wrote, every idea is about how to make our product better. So again, I think because we very focus on hiring, engineers that are high EQ and care about the user problems, and that's what they think about all day long. And then the one frustration they have is I don't have time to work on the thing that I think is going to be better for the customers, and that's where they get time to hack on. A lot of those ideas are actually going to go to production soon, so it's just really productive.
Do you have a CTO in the company, or are you you're the head of engineering, I'm assuming, with your
yes,
role?
I am head of engineering. We do have a CTO in the company. He's more of an external facing CTO that so help us recruit and everything.
Yeah. So I'm wondering what do you see your primary responsibilities as with what you do? And how, you've been an engineer, you've been an engineering manager along all these levels. Now with where you're at, what do you see as your role when you come in every day? Because it's got to be very meta by now, because you're,
meta. I'll give you a meta answer. Really, I think there's a way to think about head of engineering. There's a way to think about being an executive on the team. So to me, my first job is as an executive on the team is to build a company, right? So that involves the success of the business. That includes kind of culture of the company. So I'm not just engineering. So every decision I make actually impact, or I help to make, actually impact the entire company, not just engineering. So I don't get to only look down on my team. It's very much of, every decision you make, you have to understand the 360 degrees of impact. As head of engineering in that particular capacity, I actually, the things that I wake up day in and day out, two things. Number one is people. Do I have the right people on my team? Do I have the right number of people on my team? Are they organized the right way? That literally is something that I think about all the time. The second one is really how do you get things done, right? Because there's no shortage of ideas in startups, but talking is really cheap. So getting stuff done, moving forward, is you have to relentlessly move forward. So with the people you have, get them organized. What do you have to do? Do you understand the risk? So to me, as head of engineering, right? So your expertise is to understand the what it takes to build the tech and what's the risk, what are the risks. So combine that knowledge with your ability to execute is what I do day in and day out.
How do you balance what needs to get done with what people want to do? Individuals, someone may not want to do a certain task, but yet it needs to get done. How do you sort of motivate / maybe even shuffle the deck chairs to help people get to work on more of the stuff they like?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So, as I mentioned, I'm big believer on right people at the right time for the right opportunity. So we typically are very open to have a discussion with anybody on the team about what skill set do you want to learn, right? What opportunity are you looking for? So that when as you're doing this, our job is to train you, give you the skill set that the opportunity that you want when it comes along, you get dibs, right? But it has to be both ways. You have to wait for the opportunity. You also have to train yourself to be ready. So, the worst is the opportunity is here and you are not ready, right? So that's more of on a kind of individual basis. I typically, I would say, do not encourage people to, let me try to say it this way. If we hire right, people tend to be, if they are really working on something that are just soul killing, for one thing, make sure it's not forever, right? For two, you want to make sure they understand why this is important. So, and give them your commitment of helping that, soul killing to end at some point. So in my previous job at Mainstream Hub, there was a period of time where we have a really, really hard deadline and it's super short. So what we end up having to do is arrange for one team to take the hard project of having a hard, at the time when we told that team, you have a hard date, they didn't even know what the project is. They just know that we have a date, right? So we put a group of people together and say, you drop everything, go hit the date. And then what happens is we have to have another group of people who take over from this group of people and say, you do whatever it is to maintain what they need to do. So the people who are hitting the date don't have to fix any bugs, maintain anything that they used to do. And then you can imagine these two teams of people, right? Neither is very happy. One has a date without knowing what the hell what did you just commit me to? Which we had to explain why that's important, why that date is important for the business. And then we have a team of engineers. No engineer wants to sustain and fix other people's bugs. They're happy to fix their own bugs, but they do not want to fix other people's bugs. So in this scenario, we have two extraordinary team lead who understood the importance of the business, who worked together, right? So the one that's hitting a date is reminding the teammates every day that there's a team of people helping them fix bugs so that you don't have to worry about it, so focus to hit the date. The other one on the other side constantly remind everybody that we are fixing bugs. It's not fun. We're on call the entire time, but it's so that our teammates on the other team can go hit the date. So, unbeknownst to me, during that time, obviously people you fix bugs for 3 months, again, other people's bugs. It's tough. So there are people who, get really unhappy, discouraged. They went out and found jobs and held on to that offer in case, I promised them on that day when we hit it, we're going to switch back. And we hit it, and we switched right back, and everybody said no to their job offer. So I think you kind of, there are situations, there are tough things that you have to go do, and that's okay. And then a lot of times I think is the trust loss when people say, like, you're just saying that so that I do this thing, and then you don't meet your promises. But when you do, right, and that earn a lot of trust in our system, so that people are more willing to do the hard things. So that worked out well for us.
Mm-hmm. This is good. So some thoughts. You talked about like leading through a really hard time there. What are some good tenets of an engineering leader that you look for, or things that they need to, either practices that they have, or personality traits, or what is it that your engineering leaders need to do or know to be successful or to be great?
I'll caveat this by saying that I don't think there's a mode. I think you need to understand yourself, right? And I'm a big believer on strength-based leadership, so go figure out what your strength is and stick to that, and make sure your weakness doesn't tank you, and that's about it, right? Focus on your strengths and you figure out your leadership skill, right? That said, on my team, it's also who you work with, right? You want to work with people who complement you instead of have the same strengths, and you're going to have the same blind spots. So in that kind of setup, in that kind of environment, so what I can describe is more about on my team, right? What I'm looking for based on what I can and cannot do. I do think that on my team, for engineering managers to be successful, number one thing they have to do really, really well is care about people and the ability to grow people, right? Because in the environment that we have, it's not really about, hey, I give you a task, can you do it? It's really about this person on your team, can their career grow, both technically and professionally, right? Our job is to train them the technical abilities, but also to give them the professional skills so that they grow both on their hardcore skills and their soft skills. The other thing which I'm finding more and more important as an engineering leader, I haven't put words in it yet. I was actually just thinking about this on my way drive here in case you asked me the question, but I haven't decided on what the word is yet, which is, as a leader, you have got to learn to own accountability, right? The willingness to say, I'm going to own that responsibility is important, because a lot of engineering leaders, myself included, came from, being a developer. And I do think that as engineers, we have, because we're very logical, we have high sense of justice, right? We think we can predict the future. And I even actually have somebody who are so passionate about being right, and he calls himself Cassandra. And the problem is Cassandra is like, yes, she was right that Troy is going to be in trouble, except, Troy still got destroyed. So it really, at the end of the day, being right didn't really do anything, right? So it's not about being the victim. It's about, and it's not about being the victim. It's not about being celebrated by your intention, right? It's about being your sense of accomplishment need to come from what did you get done, right? So if you think something isn't right, if you think if you think there's a right thing to do, you either fight the bejesus out of it, or you disagree and commit, right? And just move on. So I think we spend so much time talking about how right I am, and it's all everybody's fault, everybody's clueless but me. At the end of the day, it still doesn't happen, right? So as engineering leaders, that's what I look for, is people not just talk about how right they are, how passionately being right they are, but also just learn the ability to say, when you strongly believe in something, what do you have to do to make it happen? Because as leaders, you don't get paid for good days, you get paid for nobody hires me because the company's doing great. There's no problem. I can just come in and enjoy, right? Everybody hires leaders to go solve a problem that they're not able to solve. So you're constantly in a situation where you don't know what's going on. There's gray over it. It's not black and white, right? You have a team that's either inexperienced or not competent yet, but this and that, just not perfect. So figure it out, right? Where are the holes? Go plug them. And as long as you accept that, I think you can be a good leader because you'll be the one that says, it's going to be okay, right? Here are the things that we're going to do, and here are the things we're not going to do, which is totally okay too. Hope that answers your question.
Sure. That's great. So I'm thinking too, I get the question all the time about finding, technical co-founder. There are a lot of folks with business ideas out there. They're domain experts, but they don't understand technology or how to build it, how to run teams. So if someone came to you with an idea and they wanted your advice for them with their company, what would be your advice to them in trying to handle the technical piece, assuming there was a technical piece that they needed to build out?
You mean for tech co-founders?
Okay. Let's say a business founder is trying to find a technical founder, and that's the problem that they have, but they're not quite sure how to solve it. Finding the person and then knowing the questions to ask, knowing what that person is supposed to be able to provide or know. Yep. What can you advise them on to help them in that journey?
I've worked with quite a few first engineers or tech co-founders. So I would say really code is the easy part. So don't sweat the part that you don't know. The part you should know really, really well is the people you work with. So find people that you can trust, share your value, because you can always find somebody and say, hey, this is the best engineer in town. Can you help me vet this person? Can they write code? Because as long as that person said, yeah, this person can write code, you're done, right? But if you hire the best engineer in town that doesn't share your value and decided, I don't believe what you're doing, so I'm going to write something that doesn't do what you just said, and that doesn't really help anybody, right? So you want to find people who share your dream, share your mission, and if they have great work ethic, they have the grit, then they'll do whatever, right? So, even if they don't write the best code, as long as it works, right? Because once your product catch fire, you got plenty of time to rewrite it. It's not a problem at all. I'm not don't worry about the coding part. I think really finding the right people is the most important thing.
In the early days, probably perfect is the enemy of good, right? Because you want to be building something, getting it out there and seeing if people want what you have.
Absolutely.
And people tend to over-optimize before they should.
Yep.
So what is it, you were started out as doing a lot of coding when you first got out of school. So what should be the mindset of a tech founder when they're in the early stages? How does it differ to be in a 1 or 2 person startup versus a 50 or 100 person startup? What should be your mentality when you're in that sort of 2 person startup?
I will say, no matter if you have 2 people, 50 people, or 200 people, 2,000 people, in any case, you got to figure out a way to continue to move forward, right? To reinvent ideas and innovate. Now, under that caveat, I do think recognizing that when you're 2 people company, your product, you're still trying to find your product market fit. It's totally okay to write something that somewhat works as long as demonstrate your ideas and be able to just toss it and move on. I think that, because your risk is low. So, launched 1 customer, okay, so something broke, 1 customer is not happy, but you learn something, right? So just move on. When you have a lot of people, it's actually not when you have a lot of engineers, it's really about when you have a lot of customers. Then the changes on your product and the way that you fundamentally change one way or another has more customer impact. That's when you need to be a little bit more careful, right? So the type of engineers that you hire then becomes people who understand the impact of their changes. So whereas at the very beginning, the risk is super low. If you hire people who always think about the impact of 1 customers, it's overkill, right? So they should really be willing to move forward. So at any given time, just need to make sure that you have the people with that right mentality, and when the company grow, if they can change their mentality, that's great. If not, then you just need to have different people.
Another struggle is the sort of consulting versus product, right? You get the money from the consulting, but you want to be running a product. You want to have, something where someone's giving you this recurring revenue, and you want to figure out what that product is, but you don't know what should be in the product. So a lot of times you consult to learn, but how do you sort of fight off the consulting and focus on building the product? How do you balance that? Because a lot of companies seem to have this issue, and they get stuck in not being able to be a product company when that's what they want to be.
You want to be the product company instead
Yeah.
of the consulting company.
Yeah.
I have seen, I would say I probably don't have the best answer in this because I have not seen too many cases of this, but I have seen a company called Logic Monitor. Their competitor was somewhat of a competitor to Datadog. So the way that company was built was actually the founder was in IT, and they were, he's setting up monitoring all over the place, and he decided, that's dumb, I'm repeating myself all over the place. He was doing consulting, right? So on the side, he built this product. It's actually, actually going back to my second job, startup job, it's the same thing, right? They really want to make their consulting a little bit easier, so they build a product so that every company that they consult they eat their own dog food, right? They're using their product at the site of the customer. They wouldn't charge the customer for that product, but they charge a consulting fee. But every customer you go to, your product just got better, right? The reason I had to work at the time 7 a.m. to 3 a.m. is because from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. I'm at the customer site doing whatever the thingamajig they do. And during that day, I learned, our product is missing something. So I go home, and then from 11:30 to 3 a.m., I'm working on the company's consulting product. And then the next day, you bring that, this is before, I don't know, you can work remotely, because I'm old. So you bring the binary back to the customer side and then do it again, day in and day out for 6 months. So I think if you I forgot which book, 0 to 1 or The Hardest Thing? It's really not about, do you do this or that, right? At startups, you always have a ton of things you have to do. So the challenge here is, how do you solve the end problem, right? How do you do this and that, right? So to specifically answer your consulting, I think if you can find a way to say, I have this product idea, I'm using it day in and day out while I'm doing consulting. And Logic Monitor truly is built that way, right? They actually had their product just, deployed in all of these customers, and then they decided, you know what, I don't want to consult anymore, I'll just charge you, right? And by referral, they get people who want to hire them as consultants. They say, you don't need to consult anymore, here's the product, I can help you get installed. So that's how that company started, and they're doing fairly well. I think they got acquired by a PE firm.
So they needed to spend a lot of time with their customers.
Correct.
And consulting, so that they can
Right.
understand the problem space well enough to productize it.
That's right. They did both, right? So I think that the thing here is really to figure out how to solve the and problem. If you're struggling with the or problem, probably that's the wrong problem to solve, because I don't think you can get out of that, right? Who's going to say no to money right, when you're doing consulting?
Well, so I think we should probably move on to the audience portion. Thank you very much for the conversation with us, and let's give her a round of applause, and then we'll hand the mic around.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to pass the mic out to anyone who has a question for Ching Ching. Okay, Guy, you want to start us off?
So when dealing with, let's call it a big or small team, so like the 10 to 100-ish range of an engineering team, do you think that same intensity as you often have in a two-person startup is good? Like the 80-hour, 100-plus-hour work days or work weeks, work days I wish. Is that a healthy thing, or do you try to scale back as your company gets bigger to just get longevity of employees and lifestyles? Or
I don't know if I think of it that way. It's how many hours are you working isn't something I track. I would, in a lot of ways, I definitely think, since I've lived through 6 months of literally every day, 7 a.m. to 3 a.m., I did experience burnout. I literally drove home crying every day. I don't even know why I'm crying. I'm just crying. So that is not good. Let me just straight out and say that is not good, right? Nobody should work that much for that long. So that said, maybe to answer your question a little bit differently, people always ask me, so what's your work-life balance like? I think that is a choice and that is a skill that we can teach our employees, right? So there's nothing wrong with you have something you're so passionate about, you're constantly thinking about, you're working on it. Who am I to say, please stop, right? Because sometimes you're in the zone. And why would you want to stop somebody when they're in the zone, right? But you do teach them how to manage their time and don't get themselves into it. Like, a lot of times people pull all-nighters because they don't have time management skills. They spend their day doing something and then go home to code. That's, if that is a problem, solve that problem. But when people are in the zone, I don't think that's something you should fix, but make sure that if they did, pull long hours and give them some time off otherwise. And I would do that both for 2 people team and for 200 people team. And I think it's for us, there's no set way of solving this. It's really about monitoring the health of your team, because there's actually nothing wrong with working hard and gel as a team. And a lot of teams that the reason they were very tight is because they were in the trenches together. Right? Everybody who, quote, the best team I worked with never was because I went out to drink with them every day after 5 o'clock. It's always because we have that one tight deadline, everybody came together. We were here on the weekend, we're late at night, but we delivered. That is what people always remember, right? So don't rob them that opportunity, but figure out other ways to make sure that they are taken care of mentally and health. So that's how I typically think about it.
How do you think about diversity in an engineering team, and how do you guys develop that?
So, good question. That reminded me. I would say I probably, until very recently, started to think about whether that's a thing or not. I think the most important thing here is to make sure you have people with different perspectives to be at the table, right? And you try to make a decision. I don't know if I would characterize it by either it's by your skin color as a diversity or gender as diversity. It's really about people who are different, think differently than you are. I think that's more important. Now, that said, if you guys don't mind, I need to plug this. I totally forgot. I last week attended this conference, one of the best conferences I ever attended, called Beyond Diversity. And it is to answer, Mayor Steve Adler's call for 100% of Austin residents to attend that conference. It's really about teaching everybody how to have a courageous conversation on race relations. So I didn't realize the race part when I went. I just thought the courageous conversation on diversity. So as somebody who, I went because I thought, I actually never experienced any kind of discrimination, so I'm very lucky. And so I just want to go to a conference to learn how to help other people. Interestingly, I highly, highly recommend everybody to attend. The conference actually taught me, how do you recognize something is happening, and how those type of discrimination impacts everybody. And that is everybody, right? No matter what your skin color. So being aware of that issue is super important. And to get back to your question, because of that, I now, I've always taken the stand of, I don't think I have a diversity issue because I don't practice, discrimination, and I don't think anybody is discriminating me. But it turns out that we do have a systematic problem. So being able to have that conversation is important. Being able to learn how to recognize you're in that situation is important. So ask me that question, maybe give me a couple of months, I'm still mulling it over. I definitely think it has leveled up my understanding of where we're at, why this is important. Just because I don't feel like I experienced it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Now it's really about what do I do to address it. So I'm at the beginning of thinking that over. I hope to give you a better answer after I think about it more.
Anybody else?
Oh, if you don't mind, I will add one thing. The reason I resisted, I want to say maybe because of that. I had a women engineer on my team, literally the best junior engineer I've hired in my career, doing really, really well on my team. And when I asked her how she's doing, she said, yeah, I think I'm kind of slow. And I want to ask her, why are you slow? She goes, I take a long time to make sure I'm not wrong about something. I'm like, why are you worried about you're wrong about something? And she goes, because I don't want people to think I'm here because I'm a diversity hire. So first of all, she's one of the very first candidate where everybody gave like very hard, like we scored the candidate, she scored the highest in all of the people that we hired, right? She still thinks she's a diversity hire. So that really hit home with me in that even when she's high performing, she's still experiencing that. So how to address that is something that I'm still learning. That is definitely really sad to have, and even on my team, but I haven't figured out a way to address that yet. Any other questions?
What have you learned from being a parent, and how does that influence the way how you manage a team? Because usually when people have children, they see childish tendencies in their team, and then you really gotta micro break things down, like a fifth grader.
I will caveat. I will say, my previous job, I publish all of the feedback to me that's transparent. One time, the one feedback I struggle the most is one of my team members said, "You always compare us as your children. That is disrespectful." So I do not think of my employees as children. So let me just say that out loud. Now to answer your question as parent, I met some really, really old lady long time back. She's like, when I met her, she's like 96 years old and have 11 children. I could not even remember all of her children's names straight, and she can. Well, obviously. So I asked her, like, so how do you even, which one do you love the most, right? How do you even let them, so many of them, know that you like them enough or love, what do you do with all of them? And she just really, really calmly and zenly said, just love them. And I take that to heart. So for my children, I actually don't really have a lot of time with them, and I do struggle, right? Especially I work downtown, I leave before they got up, and by the time I get home, I'd be lucky if they're just about brushing their teeth and go to bed. So if they can give me a hug, that's like perfect ending to the day. But I think they're teenagers and they don't have any attitude. So I'm very, very lucky. I do think it's because for all the time that we are together, for everything that we do with them, I believe that they know that we love them and support them. So a lot of time it's not about all of the soccer. Well, maybe I'm just trying to convince myself, but I have not been into all of the soccer games at all. But I don't think my kids will ever doubt that I love them. I think that gives them a lot of confidence, right? So I don't, they'll bring back scores. It's not, the conversation isn't about why didn't you, get certain scores. It's really about what did you do well, and what are the things you can do better at. So that does translate to work. I think at work, right, for my team members, I'm not in their business all the time, like none at all sometimes, but I hope that my team believes that I care, right? I spend a lot of time hiring every single one of them. I spend a lot of time thinking about how to help them to be successful. It doesn't mean that you have to be in their business. It just means that they know that you care and you come through with your words, and they trust that you will support them.
Hi, this is Nora. I'm from Finland and I'm from One Mind Dogs. It's online dog training.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Thank you for your insight and the experience. I can hear the wisdom, like back here. But what do you think about like the 3 points, especially the user empathy and the like the motivation for learning? Do you think that people can change those? Especially if you think about employees that have been working for a longer time. So do you think that they can develop those skills?
I think they can. I think a lot of times is your decision on the degree of change that you need to see in somebody, right? Everybody can change, right? Especially for things like user empathy. Everybody has a heart, right? Find a way to speak to their heart. But everybody do have natural tendencies, and how hard you want to fight against your natural tendency is something that you have to teach them to have the skill of, and then they have to make an effort. So while I do believe everybody can change, the amount of effort, also the amount of change you need to see is really you have to decide whether they've changed enough, right? I'm guessing the reason behind that question is, should I even invest in people's change, right? You have to make a decision on, especially at startups, the rate of change, everybody's growth needs to keep up with the rate of change of the company. So everybody has a runway, right? So if you do the math, you have to get there, here's your acceleration, what is the speed you have to change, what is the speed you have to be operating at. So some people, when they grow, when they have the aptitude and attitude, then they get there faster. They don't use up their runway. Some people use up their runway. That's how you decide whether you invest in that change or not, or how much you want to invest.
Do you use any kind of like tracking or measurements or KPIs for those? Or is it only like personality? Wow.
When I have 3,000 people on my team, I may change my answer. Right now I have 40. The biggest team I run is 60. So in that range, I have not had to do that, and I really hope I don't ever have to do that. I feel like people are more than a number. So in my head, I keep on picturing, like, when I have 3,000 people, what do? I think what I would do is make sure that the managers I hire can make that kind of judgment call, and I would trust that. But it does take a lot of leadership training. It takes a lot of trust.
Thank you.
Like a little bit of a follow-up question to that, maybe. What happens when you, a microphone. What happens when you, I guess, move into a situation where there are existing employees and you sort of inherit them? How do you come onto that scene and reinforce, your approach to the way that you manage people?
Yeah, I mean that day in and day out. Again, typically when I'm hired, is the company has a problem to solve, right? So, and I typically align with the people who are already there. They need help as well. So nobody is saying, I got no problems, right? So a lot of times it's really aligned on, let's understand what problem we have on this team, what technical challenges do we have. If we can align on what problem we're solving, you already get people's mindset aligned on, okay, the goal is the same. Now, in terms of reinforcing the culture, is about how do we solve that problem together. In the past, they may choose to do something some way, right? And so a lot of time is addressing the PTSD of, when you did that last time, it didn't really work out. And then now you're just mad, right? So now if we do it differently, we should see different results. So again, I'm always very clear with the people who were there before me, in terms of everybody gets an opportunity. I'm very clear on what I expect in the new environment. Here are the things that you need to do. Here's how you should behave. And a lot of people choose to either change themselves to stay on the team, or choose not to behave in a certain way because they just don't want to. But I'm also very clear, if you choose that, then you're choosing not to be on this team, and that's your choice, right? So again, for the people who do choose to change, then there's a timeline, there's a runway. We're super clear about the help that you would need and give them real-time feedback. You have to sincerely give them help and time to make that change. And I have seen people change, and I have seen people opt out not to. So, but it's effort. I think that commitment needs to be real and genuine for the people who are there.
Okay, it's me. So, since you're saying that people are more than their resume, it has a lot to do with their character as well. How do you write your ads to bring people in? How do you find the right people? And then when you do find them, how do you interview them? What type of questions do you ask to find out who they really are before you bring them onto your team?
Good question. So it's really hard to find out how somebody is in their resume. As a matter of fact, some of my best hires has the suckiest resume. People who are that good either don't care to show off, or they're so humble they don't know how to show off. So I do tend to invest time to get to know somebody, any candidate, right? Even if they don't turn out not to be a good fit for the team, because unless you invest time to know them, you don't know if they're a good fit or not, right? I also work with some really great recruiters, and I calibrated with the recruiters on what type of people I look for. There are times where I will see a resume going, no, pass, and the recruiter will come back and say, trust me, this one is good, you need to talk to them. And every time when a recruiter is willing to fight for somebody, turn out to be good. I have some of my best hires because I said no 3 times over until, I finally said, okay, I will meet with the person, and they turn out to be fantastic. The resume really sucked. When you meet the person, again, I don't really ask them technical questions. Everybody nowadays reads How to Crack the Coding Interview, so that's kind of you can practice on that. But I think I typically interview for self-awareness, whether they are introspective enough. So because if you are self-introspective, then you can improve, right? If you're aware of if you even aware that's a thing, right? In terms of my, I'll tell you a secret, so maybe I can't ask that question to any of you guys anymore. One question I ask that tend to catch people off guard is, tell me about the sacrifice you've made. So it's very interesting to see what people's definition of sacrifice is. And I would say for people who answer that question as in I did something selflessly so that other people benefit, tend to be better fit. And people who define sacrifice as I did something so I benefit, maybe not. So it's just an indication of how you think about what you would do for other people, right? So, all right, so I won't use that question on you guys, but it's that, and it's talking about, again, people who mention proactively learning tend to be better fit, right? People who you have to say, so what did you learn? And what did you learn then after that? What about this? And it's like, okay, then he's not thinking, but you can see them thinking on the spot, then you know that they haven't really thought about it. So that's how I typically vet. I do have a list of 65 questions that I filter through, and I'm constantly trying new questions. So you have to try the same question on a lot of people to figure out what a good question, what a good answer is, or what a bad answer is. So practice is key. And find out the question that works for you, and that typically is it took a long time to vet those. You that question.
This is more towards your crazy coding days. As far as when you transitioned from being an individual contributor going into management, do you have any tips as far as how you made that transition and into not wanting to do everything yourself, as far as like jumping in and being the one to code, but letting somebody else do it?
Yeah. I was lucky. I was very lucky that very early on in my management career, the very first management job I had was in the area that I actually know how to code. Man, I was all over the place, right? I led technical discussions, architectural discussions, from how we design code to how we deploy code and how to build system, whatever. Like, I was all over the place, right? I was very happy with myself. I thought very highly of myself too. And I thought my team really liked me too. Until my next job, not by design, I showed up at Dell for a engineering manager job for system management. I walked in, I don't even know what a hypervisor is, and my job is to build a system management software to manage hypervisor. And not only that, that thing is running on top of Dell hardware, which I don't even know what a chassis is. When people keep on saying chassis, I'm like, what is that? So anyway, I was that clueless, right? No idea what firmware is, whatever. But it turned out I wrote so much code that software development minus the code that you're writing is about how do the pieces fit together, right? You're writing a system management software that ships on a hardware that has a set schedule. What do you think is going to happen when software had to ship on a hardware, right? So I think the fact that, to me, to build a successful software project, 30% is code, 70% is God knows what. And writing code helped me realize that 70% is important, and that 70% is what the manager needs to do, right? Figure out in your project what that 70% is, right? So I think if you truly want to be successful in that, then take a project where you're not technical expertise in that domain, and you'd be surprised how much what you have learned is transferable, right? Challenge yourself, build your confidence in yourself that you are technical in that way, instead of going into people's code and mess with it. Because, if you do not think about that code 24/7, that means you're never gonna be the best on that team. So don't mess with it. Let your people who do think about it 24/7 be the smartest in the room in that particular arena, right? And you think about the 70% of the things that your team don't have time to think about, and that's your job. Do that job.
Hi, thanks for coming out. How would you think about learning a new language?
As in programming language or?
No, like spoken language.
A spoken language? Hard. I think the environment is important, right? So obviously I took English classes when I was in China, but turned out I know nothing about speaking. And when I showed up here, it turned out everybody speaks really fast, so it's really hard to be, what are you saying? So my brother and I took a dictionary with us everywhere we go, so every time people say something like, huh? And we just give them the dictionary. They'll look up the word and go, okay, that one. But I'll tell you how I learned English. It's by watching a show called Days of Our Lives. No, I'm serious. Because when you go to school and when you get home, it's like 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, right? And this is when we first came to the United States. We're not used to American TV, and at that time, there's a lot of talk show with people with weird makeup throwing chairs at each other. So we just did not understand what that is until one day my brother said, hey, on this channel, there's a show that has normal people, and they talk slower. And it turned out to be Days of Our Lives. So we kind of, my mom, at the time, the TV doesn't come with closed caption either. So my mom had to buy this device for people who have, hearing challenges, so that, you hook it up and then it displays the caption. So that's what we did. Basically, I can repeat, they'll say something on TV, and then the two of us will repeat and then follow if we read the caption, right? Understanding or not, right? That took like a few months because they really literally talk about everything. And so you kind of just said everything in 3 months, and they repeat, right? The storyline doesn't change. So somebody's always possessed by some demon. And then you just kind of say the same thing over and over. And that's how we learn, like practice exactly how to say it, so you don't have, like get rid of some of your accents and stuff. So that's how we learned until we figured out that show doesn't end. Then we stopped watching. Because in China there's a law that it ends, right? I did not realize that law is not the same here until we understood English. So that worked out.
Thank you.
Of course.
Okay, does anybody else have any more questions, or are we gonna kind of wrap up here? Okay.
Cool. Well, thank you
Great.
so much for having
Thank you very much.
your time.
So, we're going to hang out for a bit more. We have about 30 minutes. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Welcome to hang out till 9, and I'll take that. And hope you had a good time. Thanks.